Hi, everybody. Dr. Shook here. Hope you're doing well today. In today's podcast, I'm going to share with you some very important information that could make a positive and dramatic impact on your health. And it all revolves around improving GI tract function. The interesting thing about the GI tract is that it is this environment where the outside world meets the inside world. And this is an area where if you have chronic inflammation, and there's a lot of different things that could cause inflammation, it can create a lot of problems for the immune system because this is actually an immunological barrier. It is a one cell wall thick barrier system that keeps the things in the GI tract inside the GI tract and out of the bloodstream unless they are small enough to pass through the intestinal barrier into the bloodstream where the body can use it for repair processes. So anything that drives inflammation in the GI tract may cause several different problems, but one of the primary issues that has been and is being researched is that there is a loss in the diversity of our microbiome, which is the environment, the microorganisms that live within the GI tract, and you lose diversity. This is a big problem. Our current understanding of this is one where we see basically loss of diversity creates significant issues, and more diversity tends to encourage and benefit health. That's very generally speaking. I mean, obviously, if there were pathogenic or bad or unfavorable populations of bacteria and these microorganisms, even if they're in a large quantity, it'd be a problem, right? So I'm saying as long as there is a favorable balance of the type of bacteria, more abundance, more diversity tends to be beneficial to health. Less abundance, less diversity tends to be more of a problem and a negative sign. So the GI tract microbiome, it and really here we're going to refer to it as in this particular case when we're talking about a sub component or some components of the environment in the gut, which is this microbiome. We're talking about a smaller part of that overall environment. We're going to call it microbiota. And the microbiota consists of bacteria. What we're really talking about are bacteria, viruses, and fungi, and even parasites that are really critical to your systemic health. That means your full body health. I mean, it has a significant impact on the immune system. Your body and this microbiome environment share a very symbiotic relationship, which just means basically when you feed and nurture a healthy microbiome, it will in turn benefit your health in several ways. And some of the ways that this happens is that a lot research is showing us and teaching us so much about this important relationship. But so far, what a few of the key things that have been identified are that the GI tract bacteria, when they're healthy, they support the health of the GI tract. Like literally, they make these postbiotics. They make these byproducts of their metabolism. One of which that's very important, or a group of which that are very important, are short chain fatty acids, and these are again postbiotics. The bacteria metabolize and break down fibers in your food. These fibers, then the bacteria, as they feed on them, they create these byproducts, and some of the byproducts, if you're fortunate, and this is a really important thing, not all bacteria will do this, but it's important that these short chain fatty acids are made because they have a really significant impact on your physiology, on the health of the intestinal lining, on the bacteria themselves. The short chain fatty acids have an impact on the inflammatory response in the body because of their impact on the intestinal lining health. And one of the most significant short chain fatty acids that's really been focused on in the scientific literature is called butyrate, and there are a lot of different short chain fats, but this is one of the connections. So if you the GI tract bacteria, if you feed them and you nurture diverse bacteria and an abundance of these bacteria, It supports the health of the GI tract. They produce these postbiotics, which are there's much more than just butyrate, which I mentioned, which is a short chain fat, but that's a very important one. It contributes to and supports immune function. It helps with detoxification capacity. Like when I learned this, I was really it was really just like so fascinating. The body is so amazing, and the more that we learn, the more you realize that you don't know, the more you realize how interconnected everything is. But the bacteria in your digestive tract, they have so one of the reasons it's important to have diversity of these bacteria and a lot of different types of bacteria is that these bacteria have their own unique properties and qualities. And so for one example is that some bacteria can actually help with the metabolism of things that you might get exposed to or actually help your body to eliminate and detoxify different things that you might come in contact with. So they have their own detoxification pathways. So when I say that we have a symbiotic relationship, we benefit mutually. This is this can't be like understated. This is such a huge issue and so important. So, inflammation can really wreak havoc on these bacteria. So it's critical that we do everything that we can to maintain a healthy microbiome, this environment in our GI tract. And one of the most destructive things to the microbiome is inflammation. So anything that drives an inflammatory process in the gut is really going to wreak havoc on these bacteria. So we're going to discuss inflammation, and I'm going to cover 3 supplements that were identified in a recent literature review that show a lot of promise of improving the health of the GI tract and microbiome. And I know that these supplements can have a really significant and dramatic impact on the GI tract because I recommend them on a regular basis for people with GI tract inflammation. I mean, this is actually the supplements, 2 of the 3 I recommend almost all the time. It's as part of a core supplementation strategy to try to optimize human physiology when it's not optimal. I mean, they're almost always appropriate, especially if they're not currently being supplemented with. So we'll talk about those in a minute, but let's start with and get into inflammation just a little bit. So some really common causes of GI tract inflammation are there's a lot, and this is not an all-inclusive list, I should say. So inflammatory bowel diseases, and I've talked about this in some of my recent podcasts. I've been really trying to focus on the GI tract because it's such a common source of problems for people. And I work a lot with clients around the world, across the United States, and I work with people that have autoimmune problems. They have autoimmune conditions. I work a lot with Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, but I also work with people that are trying to optimize their health, and really even people that have autoimmunity. A lot of times they're like, I've got this thing, and they have this negative association in their mind, and they feel, a lot of times they feel unlucky. They are depressed about this diagnosis, this problem that they have, and it can be really easy, and it varies. Autoimmunity and its severity and its ability to make a difference with it varies from person to person. And what I can tell you is that it's common to have multiple autoimmune conditions at one time. And I look at everyone that I work with through the lens of how much can we optimize their physiology. And I really think that everyone that I've come in contact with, that I've worked with, I always work to get them as healthy as possible. So I look at at health on a continuum. So wherever they're starting, we're going to try to push them as far in the optimized in the direction of health optimization as possible. So, addressing everything that we can possibly address to dampen the autoimmune process, to optimize their human physiology, to get everything to just the most optimal state possible. And so I work with people that will sometimes come to me and say, you know what, I'm not, don't have a diagnosis. I just want to be as healthy as I possibly can. Can you, look over my case and help me to formulate a strategy for health optimization? So that's why the GI tract is so important because a lot of times in people that don't have a diagnosis, or they're just trying to get healthy, a lot of times you approach them in a very similar matter. I mean, really, the lens through which I look at these problems is very similar. Where are the problems? What can we do to optimize them? What are the drivers? Can we identify drivers of the process? What can we do about those problems, or those drivers of poor or suboptimal health? And let's work to get that person as healthy as we can with the factors that we have to deal with. And that's the same lens through which you look at human health and optimization. It's the same continuum. So the gut is often a common factor, even that you have to support, even with people that are looking for health optimization. So there's a lot that can be done in these cases. And the most common issues that you'll see that drive the GI tract inflammation are inflammatory bowel diseases, viral and bacterial infections. Fungal overgrowth is pretty common as well. I mean, people can have obviously cancers. Medications can disrupt and cause issues with the gut. Processed foods, food additives. This is just a number of issues that can disrupt our GI tract microbiome and our gut health. So, one of the things that's really important is, if you don't already know this, you need to work with your medical doctor if you're having any problems and symptoms, to help you get a better understanding on whether or not you have inflammation in the GI tract. I mean, that's really a starting point. What you want to do is try to figure out and get a starting point. And then from there, you can start to build a strategy and a plan. But you have to have some idea of what's happening and what's driving your symptoms. So the first thing, and one of the most important things to understand, is when there's inflammation, it disrupts the intestinal microbiome. So this environment in the gut. And this can lead to leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And that will drive what's called translocation, okay, of material, translocation of things, whether it be bacteria, bacterial byproducts, bacterial cellular debris, partially digested food proteins, you name it. Anything in the gut could, if it breaks down into small enough pieces, if the intestinal lining is leaky or permeable, it can translocate, meaning move from inside the bowel through the gut wall into the bloodstream. And that triggers systemic inflammation. So you have an inflammatory response. The immune system sees this foreign debris typically coming into the bloodstream. That triggers an immune response because the immune system doesn't understand what it is, and that drives full body systemic inflammation. Now, this is a leading theory. There are several leading theories, but this one has a lot of strength and a lot of evidence. In clinical practice, it comes together this way as well, that leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability, you can look it up in PubMed. Go to pubmed.gov, type in intestinal permeability, hyperpermeability, those words with autoimmunity, whatever, and you will find a lot of literature, a significant amount of literature. This is not some kind of alternative medicine thing that has no evidence. There's lots and lots of evidence on this now. And this is a leading theory on the gateway to triggering and driving autoimmune processes, because the immunological response to these things coming into the bloodstream, and if it's persistent, it may lead to your immune system reacting to your own tissues. And this is through a process called molecular mimicry, because of the similarity of the things coming in from the GI tract. Their protein structures may be similar to your own tissues' protein structures, so similar that they mimic one another in structure, and the immune system can't differentiate them, so it reacts to you, thinking that you or your tissues that are similar in structure are the for example, partially digested food proteins or peptides that are coming through the GI tract wall into the bloodstream. And that process of your immune system attacking your tissues mistakenly, because of the similarity in structure, is called cross reactivity. So that's as far as we'll go with that, because I've talked about that, and that can be, a really long conversation in and of itself. But there's a lot, if you understand that concept. Really, one of the things that I try to do with people clinically is identify as much as we can of the things that are driving an immune response, that are promoting an immunological response. And then if we can identify those things, we work to remove those from the diet, the environment, and dampen the immune process. Because the what I'm talking about when I reference and I discuss autoimmunity is really environmentally induced autoimmunity, environmental triggers that drive the immune process. We'll talk about that in just a second. I'll give you a little overview of that, because I think it's really important to just keep that in mind. As most people, autoimmunity is a huge problem around the world. Huge problem. More people have it, significantly more than cancer. It is a huge epidemic, and it seems to only be growing. And if you look at this model, this idea behind it, it's because of environmental factors that break down our immune barrier systems, that drive immune responses against environmental triggers, that then result in our body attacking itself. That it creates this gateway so that our immune system will attack ourselves. And that's, again, the leading theories, which have a lot of support and show a lot of evidence, are cross reactivity due to molecular mimicry, and then there are other mechanisms like bystander activation, cryptic antigens, epitope spreading. There's other things. So you can, but that's kind of beyond of what we want to talk about here. I want to give you some useful information for inflammation of the gut, how it disrupts the GI tract bacteria, and then what we can do to try to support that with some simple strategies. So let's see. I kind of took us on a tangent there, but this GI tract inflammation leads to leaky gut and this broken barrier system, which drives the systemic immune activation. The good news with this is that there are some easy and specific things that you may want to consider to improve GI health. So we're going to talk about some supplementation in a second. Before I get into that, I want to cover briefly this idea of autoimmunity, environmentally induced autoimmunity that I just discussed. Okay, that I just mentioned. If you're watching this in the video version on YouTube or Facebook, Spotify, you can check out this diagram I have. If you're listening to this in the audio version, then what I'm going to go over for just a few minutes is this model called the Autoimmune Triad. And this is really three things that are believed to contribute to triggering and driving environmentally induced autoimmunity. Environmentally induced autoimmunity is just basically where things from the environment trigger the immune response that lead to the immune system attacking our tissues, and then the process of that either being initiated and or being perpetuated or continued to be driven. So this model, what we're looking at is a Venn diagram. Venn diagram is basically four circles. There are three circles that are set up kind of like in a triangular pattern, and they overlap. And then in the center is the fourth circle, and that's all three of the factors, all three of the circles that are kind of in the triangular pattern overlap, and where they overlap and have commonality, that is environmentally induced autoimmunity. So these three circles that are in this triangular pattern are all the necessary components that need to be present for environmentally induced autoimmunity to occur. This is a theoretical model, obviously, but it is a model that really has been I think it's a fantastic model. I think it's really accurate based on the information that we have about autoimmunity, and it's an exciting way. I think it's exciting because it's an exciting way to look at autoimmunity through a lens that actually gives you some ability to make a difference. If you've got an autoimmune disease and you've been to your doctor, you'll know that they're trying to help as best they can, but they really don't have anything to help you. And if they do, it's a medication that suppresses the immune system in most cases, and dampens, or it's anti-inflammatory. But it's all working to modulate or change the immune response, to dampen it so that you don't further destroy tissues. But it's not really addressing at all why the immune activation is occurring in the first place. That's like the the ultimate thing is to figure out, like, okay, well, what's actually causing the initiation of this process. And listen, this is going to be a simplified model, but this is not a simple problem. I want to be real clear. This is not a simple problem. We don't know how to cure autoimmunity. Even when I work with people, I tell them straight up, because this is the truth. This is the truth. We don't know how to cure autoimmunity. We don't know that when I'm working with people and we're trying to work through this model that I'm going to explain, the triad of autoimmunity, we don't know if we can even help them. Like I tell people, and it's in most cases, we have a process where I have people complete a form that I review prior to accepting them as a client to work with, because I want to make sure that I think I can help. And if I can't, then I definitely, we give them resources, point them in the right direction to try and get them to the people that I think can best help. But there's some people that I don't take on because I don't think I can help. So we get them, try to get them where they need to go. But even when I do work with people that I think I can help, and most people do improve to at least some degree, there's always a chance that people won't improve or they'll get worse, because that's how complicated these issues are. So without belaboring the point more, the autoimmune triad, these overlapping factors that contribute to environmentally induced autoimmunity, the three major categories are environmental triggers. And the environmental triggers that we tend to look at are food peptides. So that's a part of the proteins that are in foods. They can trigger an immune response if they make their way into the bloodstream. Pathogens. Pathogens have a number of different mechanisms through which they may induce autoimmunity. So chronic infections, or bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses, they all have incredible ability to stimulate the immune system and trigger and drive autoimmune processes. And you can have a lot of these things that are present over a long period of time. They're chronic infections. You may not even know that you're dealing with it. So that is, or I should say, those are the pathogens. So foods, environmental triggers are really food components, pathogens, and then chemicals. Chemicals can also trigger an immunological response and drive the immune process. Another factor that's required for environmentally induced autoimmunity. So these are the three circles that are in the triangular arrangement. Okay, environmental triggers we just talked about. One of the other overlapping circles are, or I should say, is barrier system breach. Now that's what I've been talking about. When the intestinal lining breaks down, the barrier system gets broken and compromised, and when that happens, things can translocate, move from inside the GI tract across the gut wall into the bloodstream, and that drives that barrier breach, or intestinal permeability, right, or AKA known as leaky gut, is really what is a breakdown of the immune barrier that then allows this cascade of inflammatory responses to begin. Okay, so that's our second circle that's overlapping. Our third circle in this Venn diagram is immune system dysfunction. And immune system dysfunction it's a lot of different things. We're still discovering a lot of these factors, but one simple thing that I can share that will probably make sense to you is vitamin D. Now, vitamin D, one of the many ways that it appears to contribute to proper immune function is that it helps with immune system regulatory function. So you think about that, that means the coordination and balancing of immune cell production. And there's all kinds of different types of immune cells. You don't want them to be really out of balance. You want the immune system to function appropriately. When the immune system needs to ramp up cells to fight off an infection, you want it to do that. When the infection's gone, though, you don't want those cells to stay ramped up. You want them to calm down. You want the immune system to come back to a baseline, to where it's in surveillance and it's not in a perpetual state of inflammatory mobilization, or being driven in that direction, right? You want it to function properly. You want it properly regulated. So vitamin D helps with immune system regulatory function. It helps with regulatory T cells. And so that's just one of many, many things. Like, so if vitamin D was really deficient, might we have an issue with immune regulatory function? Possibly. So that's one of many, many things. Immune dysfunction could come from chemical exposures too. It could come from fatty acid imbalances. It could come from vitamin and mineral deficiencies or imbalances. I mean, there's a ton of different things, right? But immune dysfunction is another one of our factors in this Venn diagram. So you've got immune dysfunction, you've got barrier system breach, and you've got environmental triggers that all overlap to contribute to and form in the center of the Venn diagram environmentally induced autoimmunity. So what we do, and when I'm working with people, is we follow what I put together this another diagram. So again, if you're watching the video, you can check it out. But it's basically a diagram that shows the model that I use when I work with people, with my clients, and it's basically a detect, remove, repair model. Detect the problems. Once you've got an overview of what's happening, then you put together a plan to remove the problems, and then you move into the third step, which is repair the damage. And it's a theoretical model. Obviously, it's very conceptual, and there are 9 different steps to it. In each in each of the 3 different sections of our strategy, the detect, remove, repair, there are 3 different sub-steps. So our detect process is really gather a lot of information, gather as much information we can about the person, their history, consult with them, and really get to the bottom of what might be driving things from looking at their history. And then we want to look at testing. We want to get testing to survey what's happening in a quantitative way, so we can actually put numbers to these symptoms and try to understand what's actually happening biochemically. And that allows us to come up with a more specific, unique strategy based on that person's biochemistry. And then we want to review with the client, review what's going on, discuss strategy, discuss the thoughts, and then come together and say, all right, what makes the most sense to both the client and from my perspective, like, what do I think would work? And we come up with a plan, and then we formulate recommendations, and we start to implement our strategy. That's really all part of the review, recommend, and implement the strategy is part of the remove phase. Then when you get into the repair phase, after you have implemented your strategy at a periodic follow-up, say 6 weeks, 3 months, somewhere in there, maybe even monthly, you want to reevaluate. And this starts the repair process. Reevaluate, and then based on the reevaluation, you want to revise your strategy, and then you kind of go back into, you go through this cycle of creating a new recommendation, implementing the strategy, and then you again wait until say a month, 2 months, 3 months have passed. The person's been working on the issues, and then you reevaluate again, you revise, and you complete this process. Most of the time, that takes 2 or 3 cycles. Most of the time, and then the goal is to really just graduate with. I say graduate to take care of yourself, so that because now you've learned a lot of the strategies to help get yourself into a better position. You know what you've done from a diet, lifestyle perspective to get you healthy. So you're more empowered to take care of yourself, if that makes sense. Now you're more in tune with your body, and that's typically the conceptual model. So that's the model that I recommend, that I've seen work the very best when working with people. So let's get into the 3 key supplements that a recent literature review showed to help with improving the microbiome, which can have, and these supplements can also have a positive impact on different causes of GI inflammation. So let's start number 1, which we've already kind of talked about a little bit. And number 1 is vitamin D. And so the main thing here with vitamin D is to make sure that you're not deficient in vitamin D. So get your levels checked and supplement if needed. I mean, this is critical. You really need to know what your vitamin D levels are. It's not a complicated blood test. Any of your doctors can order it. Just ask them. Just be very direct and say, hey, I have not had my vitamin D checked. I need to see what it is. I want to supplement with it. I know it's a fat soluble vitamin, and that it can be toxic if I take too much of it. And you can take too much. It's rather difficult to do, but you definitely can, and it can drive up calcium, and it may lead to displacement of calcium, and so you definitely want to monitor these levels. So get your levels checked, and then supplement if needed. The some of the issues with vitamin D. Low vitamin D, and when we're talking about GI tract inflammation, low vitamin D has been associated with worse outcomes related to inflammatory bowel disease. So again, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, celiac disease. These are autoimmune diseases of the bowel, and low vitamin D has been associated with worse outcomes. And it definitely correlates with what we talked about as far as immune dysfunction. When we're talking about environmentally induced autoimmunity, we're talking about our contributing components, and one of the contributing components to environmentally induced autoimmunity was what? It was, I used the example of low vitamin D and how vitamin D was critical for immune system regulatory function. So low vitamin D associated with worse outcomes related to inflammatory bowel disease. Vitamin D supports immune regulatory function, which is what I've been saying. And another interesting factor is that vitamin D may actually lead to more bacteria in the gut that promote short chain fatty acid production, like butyrate, which I talked about, right? Butyrate's that short chain fat that's a postbiotic. It helps to encourage the health of the GI tract. This is huge. So what you'll see is that a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, the supplementation that we're talking about, they're pleiotropic, meaning they affect the system in multiple ways. And this is really what you want to go for. And guess what? This is what really, from a functional medicine perspective, which is what we're talking about, which is looking at how do we optimize human physiology, really everything is almost everything's pleiotropic. It works through multiple physiological pathways to affect multiple things at one time. So it's not like it just does one thing. So that's awesome. That's what I'm always going for. How can we do the least amount of interventions to get the most impact, right? This is one of the things for sure. Vitamin D. Okay. The third key to improving and supporting GI tract inflammatory response and GI tract bacterial balance is fish oil supplementation. Now, interestingly enough, there was Wellington and colleagues. So I've got a references slide. This time you can read it. If you're watching video, you can read it. If you're not watching the video, you can definitely go to one of our YouTube, Facebook, our website. You can go and look, and I've got the references. But one of the studies that I'm referencing here and getting a lot of this information from was Wellington and colleagues did a review, and they studied the relationship between fish oil and gut bacteria in people with inflammatory bowel disease. And so inflammatory bowel disease is one of the most significant drivers of GI tract inflammation, maybe the most. It just creates massive inflammation of the intestinal tract because your immune system's attacking the intestines. So it's obviously a huge problem. Fish oil supplementation showed improvements in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And it looked like that what it does, it has this anti-inflammatory effect. One of the things where it blunts something called interleukin-1 cellular receptor sensitivity. So your cells, when your immune system is driving an inflammatory response, you will produce these chemical messengers called cytokines. Some cytokines encourage an inflammatory state. Some cytokines, which are all produced by the immune system, are more of an I don't want to say anti-inflammatory, but they promote resolution of the inflammatory process more. So all of the cells of your body have these little receptors all over the surface. And when these cytokines are present, they can bind to these cellular receptors, and they can change the cellular physiology. So these interleukin-1 is a cytokine that's pro-inflammatory. So it promotes inflammation. So this fish oil has been shown to blunt the sensitivity of the cellular receptors to interleukin-1, which means that it would have an anti-inflammatory effect. Diminish the inflammatory effect, or diminish the response to interleukin-1, right? Because you have to have the receptor so that the interleukin-1 can bind to it and promote the inflammatory process. And if it's less responsive to interleukin-1, it could lower the inflammatory process. So this was really pretty amazing stuff. This is, again, fish oil is pleiotropic. It has many, many, many different physiological effects. So this is just one we're focusing on GI inflammation and GI tract bacterial, improving the GI tract bacteria. So the favorable gut bacteria were also more abundant in this study. So not only did it have these anti-inflammatory effects, it seemed to improve the beneficial GI tract bacteria that we'd like to see more of. It increased them. So it actually kind of fed the GI tract bacteria too. So this is huge, right? So we're talking about GI tract inflammation and GI tract bacteria. This is a a major, could be very significant, make a significant difference. I recommend vitamin D and fish oil, or at least essential fatty acids from some source, to my clients, almost everyone that I work with, because almost everyone needs it unless they're already taking it at sufficient levels, and but it's fantastic. The third key and the third supplement to help support GI tract inflammation and GI tract bacterial balance is resveratrol. Now, it's really interesting. Again, pleiotropic, many different physiological pathways affected here. But for one thing, it helps to lower something called INOS, or inducible nitric oxide synthase. And it is a form of nitric oxide. You may have heard the word nitric oxide before. There are three different types of nitric oxide. There's this type, which when it's high, it tends to cause tissue damage. Okay, INOS. And when we lower INOS, the inducible nitric oxide synthase, it helps to diminish tissue destruction, which would be great, right? So when you have autoimmunity or you have an inflammatory process, you want the inflammatory process to resolve. And so one of the things, you want it to resolve when it should resolve. The INOS is something that you typically want to minimize. And there are two other types. There's NOS, N for neuron or neuronal nitric oxide synthase, which has a protective effect on neurons, nerve cells. And then there is ENOS, which is endothelial nitric oxide synthase. And ENOS is probably the one that's more popular, has been talked about more. It's the one that you really activate, that gets vasodilation occurring. The vessels dilate and you get better blood flow. This is something, some of the mechanisms that some of the medications for like erectile dysfunction work on, trying to enhance that pathway. But INOS is something that is lowered with resveratrol, which is great because in a lot of cases we want to dampen that. It's something that needs to be reduced to help reduce the inflammatory process. So that's pretty cool, resveratrol. That's one of the things it does. It also has been shown to improve. Again, Wellington and colleagues did this review paper, and I've got a link to it in the references. But it improves bacterial balance in the gut. It helps us support the bacteria, which we want, right? We want this bacterial balance. This is important for GI tract health, systemic health, immune health. It's critical. And then it also activates the SIRT1, the sirtuins and SIRT1. And SIRT1, you can learn a lot about. Like, I'm not an expert in the sirtuins. I'm familiar with them. I understand a lot of it, but you can check out the preeminent expert in the sirtuins, at least I think so, is David Sinclair at Harvard. And he has written a book called Lifespan. It's a fantastic book. I've got links to it in the references. But SIRT1 activation is something that resveratrol has been shown to do. SIRT1 is a histone deacetylase, and what it basically does is it causes your DNA to be more tightly wound. Okay, so your DNA is red. That's how the proteins are produced, but it causes the DNA to be more tightly wound, and it changes the ability of some of the regions, some of the parts of the DNA to be red. And this affects gene expression. It basically controls the expression of genes. It turns genes on and off. So it protects. One of the things is it's been shown to be protective from oxidative stress. The SIRT1 also promotes DNA stability, and it's involved in cellular apoptosis, or cell death, programmed cell death. And this is a good thing. We want to have. Listen, when our cells reach the end of their life cycle, we don't want them just hanging around, because then you run into this issue called senescence, and this where these cells, your cells, they don't really function the way they should. They just kind of sit there, and instead of dying, they just release this inflammatory chemistry called the secretome, and it tends to be this pro-inflammatory type of secretions that it's putting out into the tissues around it, which can influence the other cells to negative characteristics to occur there. So we want these cells to be cleared, and we want them to go through this senescence protocol. This may help to clear them, put it that way. So again, check out David Sinclair's work, Harvard researcher, awesome guy, really great work. I think he's making huge strides in his lab, and everyone that works with him in really contributing to the benefit of humanity long term. So great work. So in summary, let's bring it home here. In summary, GI inflammation keys to improvement. Okay. Number one, GI tract inflammation contributes to breaking down your intestinal barrier system. This is called intestinal hyperpermeability in the scientific literature, or just look up intestinal permeability. And the lay term is leaky gut. When this occurs, you have things that move from inside the GI tract through the intestinal lining into the bloodstream. This is called translocation, and this drives systemic inflammation. Okay, this is a major problem. You do not want this to occur on a prolonged basis. It will lead to a lot of different health problems. I mean, you can just look up endotoxemia. Look up endotoxemia, endotoxins, and the consequences of endotoxins, and you're going to find a lot of problems that occur. This drives systemic inflammation and autoimmunity through molecular mimicry and cross-reactivity. Okay, so we talked about those earlier. If you're autoimmune, remember the autoimmune triad that we talked about, and work with a functional medicine practitioner to address root causes of these issues. Now, definitely, you want your team of people together. You want your primary care medical doctor, you want any of your specialists, and you need to have a functional medicine practitioner. That's just my belief. You need a team, and that's what I would highly recommend and suggest. Remember, the autoimmune triad are 3 different groupings of factors that come together to contribute to either trigger and or perpetuate environmentally induced autoimmunity. The 3 factors and these are the major categories, but there are subcategories under these. Immune dysfunction or dysregulation. Number 1, immune dysfunction. And then you have environmental triggers, and you have broken barrier systems, compromised barrier systems. Leaky gut plus immune dysfunction plus environmental triggers could either be food peptides, which are part of the food protein broken down. Could be bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, which are pathogens, or chemicals. All could contribute and do contribute. Improving the microbiome may be the key to improving GI tract inflammation. If we can change the gut bacteria, remember, symbiotic relationship. We feed them, we help them to flourish and change and grow. They help us, right? So that's the key. So what can you do? Number 1, see your medical doctor for further workup. You need a diagnosis and a starting point. Number 2, consider advanced diagnostic testing. I would say if you're having problems with the gut, there are a few labs that I really like, and really wouldn't start here. You need someone's really someone to look at this and work the functional medicine practitioner that can give you directional what testing might be appropriate for you. But in general, like I would probably say if I really suspected GI tract inflammation, I might suggest Cyrex Labs testing array number 2, the intestinal permeability screen, array number 3X, the wheat and basically autoimmune reactivity screen against transglutaminases, and number 5, the multiple tissue antibody panel. That's probably what I would look for to see what's the state of the intestinal lining, what is the reactivity to gluten, the best test that I know of today, outstanding, and then that array 3X, is there any autoimmune reactivity to transglutaminases that are found in the intestine, the brain, or the skin? Okay, there's 3 different types that are tested there. And then number 5, the multiple tissue autoimmune panel will survey there's 20 plus different tissues in this panel that they're looking to see if you have antibodies against. So it's a screening for autoimmunity to find out if you know you're autoimmune. It helps you to understand if there's autoimmunity expanded to other tissues, and it's you have a much higher probability or chance of having an autoimmune condition if you already have one. So it helps us to see what else is going on. And then the second thing would be a comprehensive stool assessment that looked at bacteria, uh, fungal potential for fungal overgrowth. It may even look at viral particles using a quantitative PCR test. The test would also look at intestinal health markers, like inflammatory markers like calprotectin. It would look at your surface immunity called secretory IgA, and it would look at things like the stool color, consistency. It would look for mucus in the stool, red blood cells in the stool, all that kind of stuff, so that we can understand what's happening locally in the intestinal tract. Do we have any kind of do we have dysbiosis and imbalance of bacteria? Do we have undergrowth of something? What? And then from that data, you go, okay, well, what can we do? How can we support this? And that's where you put together a more specific strategy. Now, I often recommend far more testing than this, because I try to cast a wide net to gather a lot of data so that we can then formulate a more specific and unique plan to that person. But you can start with no testing. A lot of people that I've worked with and a lot of people that I've talked to, that they start with dietary changes and improve the things that they know they need to improve, right? They know that their diet's not great. They know they're eating too much sugar. They know they're eating processed foods. They know that they're not getting sleep. They know they're consuming food additives, and they're drinking soft drinks and other things that may cause disruption and problems with their GI tract. They know a lot of potential triggers, so they start with trying to fix those things. That's a good and appropriate thought process. So, number 3, consider partnering with a functional medicine practitioner as part of your healthcare team. I mean, functional medicine, I think, is really the future of healthcare, and it's not like future like standing alone, but it is going to be, I think, a foundational component of health in the future. We're gonna have a full team of everyone that has their own specialties, because a lot of the problems that people have is they go to their doctor, their medical physician, and the doctor recommends medications and things to help them. And guess what? That's what the doctor's job is. They're there to help you the best that they can. And most doctors are classically trained. And that classical training, and also because they're working within, in the US anyway, an insurance-based model, there's a limited amount of time that they have to work with you. And believe me, they're not happy that they can't help more. I mean, it's the general, they're not. They want to help, but they only have, typically, I mean, sometimes they have curative, but they have palliative tools, things to help with symptoms. And that's what they often have. And guess what? You need that. I've worked with people that are autoimmune that we cannot, no matter what I try to do, where we work together to try to do, we cannot dampen the autoimmune process. Just don't know why. Don't know why. And guess what? Those people, thank goodness that we have anti-inflammatories. We have that steroids are available, that biologics, that immunosuppressants are available, because they would deteriorate much more rapidly, right? So we do everything that we can, but you want to work with a functional medicine practitioner that can help you to look at root causes of a lot of these issues, right? Based on the information we have, based on the leading theories that we have, which is some great science. So work together, put together a team, live the best life possible. As far as GI tract inflammation and the gut bacteria, the supplements that we talked about that appear to be really, really potentially helpful here are vitamin D, fish oil, and resveratrol. Final thing is stay positive. No matter the cause, there is hope. And I truly believe that. And I like to encourage everyone to remember that. It's very important not to lose hope, that there is, the body's capable of amazing things, and science is progressing, knowledge is progressing, and there is hope. So hang in there. Lastly, this podcast is brought to you by our very own transformation program. It's our dietary, lifestyle, and nutritional supplementation program that we put together. Really, I put it together after working with people in the clinic and just, over and over, finding that we were recommending a lot of some of the same things over and over as a backbone for a an individualized plan for people. So there were some things that were very core for everyone. So dietary optimization, lifestyle optimization, and then a lot of supplementation. There were some things that had very common themes that we would see everyone tended to need and would respond well to. So we put together this thing called the transformation program, and I call it the transformation challenge. It's really a focused 30-day program, but 6 weeks total, 2 weeks of organization and planning, 4 weeks of implementation. That's really been so helpful to people. So we were using it clinically. We developed it clinically, and I think I'm on my 4th iteration of the program, constantly updating it. But if you're interested in that program, you can basically get it for free. It's $1. We charge $1 because we were getting all kinds of um, bot registrations. It was the weirdest thing. And as soon as we said, you know what, it's $1, that was gone. So that made my life easier. So that's what it is. If you're interested in the transformation program, it's this. Listen, this is great. Like, we've used it to help people support optimal thyroid physiology, but really it is an autoimmune. It works very well for most people that I've worked with personally that have autoimmunity. It's not a bad foundational strategy for autoimmunity in general. It it's also helpful for people that aren't autoimmune, that might have IBS or just not feel well. It's a good framework for health optimization for most people. In a lot of cases, I mean, there are obviously going to be some people that for some reason it's not helpful or whatnot, and that's okay. I mean, there's nothing works for everyone for sure. So this is definitely something that you might want to consider. If you're interested, you can check it out at thyroidprogram.com. That's THYROID program.com, and you can learn all about it there. Lastly, if you need one-on-one assistance, I do work with people across the United States and around the world. You can visit drbradshok.com to learn more about working with me through distance consulting. That's drbradshok.com to learn more about that if you're interested. And then I have, if you watch the video, you can check out the slides, the references slides. And as always, keep this in mind. You need to work with your doctor to get a good starting point. You need to have a primary care physician. A lot of people come to the internet and they just look for information online on how to help themselves, and I commend you. Great, that's awesome. If you want to research and or read and listen and study as much as you can about how to help yourself. I'm a true believer in empowering you to to take back your health, to be in control as much as possible. But you need a team of people to work with you. Okay, so make sure that before you do anything, before you make any changes, talk to your primary care physician, because you know the videos and information that I provide are not medical advice. They're not meant to be medical advice. It's not meant to be a diagnosis, or it's just my thoughts and opinions on the things that I'm talking about here. My experience with the clients that I've worked with, and it's not meant to be a treatment at all. So make sure that you're talking to your doctor before you make any changes. So I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to talking to you on the next one.